Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's rock.
Great. Well, hey everyone. So I have some pretty exciting updates this week.
Cool.
In the last couple of days, we've been hanging out here with a bunch of like Math Olympics type people in Stanford. And one of them, Daniel something, unfortunately, I don't remember his last name, came up with a more efficient, super clever decision oracle. Basically, for detecting finality, like detecting decisions. And it's a pretty cool algorithm. I can try to describe it, but we do get basically polynomial efficiency for detecting decisions in in any of these latest message-driven majority honest-driven estimators. We're still working on writing everything up, but the results pretty compelling. And we get the same numbers as with like multi-layer clique oracle in terms of the fault tolerance, but it's just more efficient to compute the committee like clique. So do you guys want?
Is there a write-up?
The write-up is in progress. We should have it in a couple of days. We're definitely working on a write-up. Basically, it works on very similar primitive as the clique, in that like nodes need to hear from each other and need to not have any new later messages that disagree. So, right now we're using this term, it's probably going to change later, we're just calling it lobbies. We say like validator A lobbies validator B in a particular view. If in B's latest message, they see A agree, and all new messages from A in that view, all the ones that are after that message, also agree. So, normally in the clique, we want all the validators to see everyone in the clique lobby them. But this approach softens that, and it says, look, out of some set of validators S, they need to be lobbied by at least Q of each other. So each one needs to be lobbied by Q of them, but they don't need to, that doesn't need to cover all of S. So, we kind of have this like slightly more porous graph. It's not fully connected graph out of this set of validators.
Yeah.
You have at least Q connections, or connections to Q weight. So instead of having like a fully tightly connected clique of size Q, we have like some bigger set of validators which have like Q connectedness inside them. So hopefully that makes sense as a kind of reimagining of the basic kind of setup around a set of validators.
Mm-hmm.
So and what I just described is like a one layer where basically they see each other agree, Q of each other agree, each of them see Q of each other agree, and then each of them don't have any new later messages from these Q. And the algorithm for, I think, like greedy, efficient algorithm for finding this thing is you start off first assuming that like the entire set of validators all lobby each other sufficiently well. And then you like cycle through the validators. And if you find, well, first you construct the edge graph, the lobby edge graph. So you create a graph with the nodes of the validators and an edge from validator to another if it lobbies it. And then we cycle through the validators and we remove a validator from the graph if it doesn't have these Q incoming edges. And that removes also the outgoing edges that it has to other validators. And so, you need to go like cycle through the nodes maybe more than once. But it's the linear and the number of edges, I think. So it's square and the number of validators complexity to do this operation of removing validators that aren't part of this committee. And you can basically show that if a validator is removed by this algorithm, then there's no committee that they're a part of, which kind of justifies the greedy search, because we're kind of not ever making a mistake when removing a validator from this set. And you start off with a whole set of validators, and then we shrink down to some set that's a superset of every committee that actually has this Q connectivity. So that's kind of like the greedy algorithm. And the idea with the soundness is that if Q is bigger than 1/2 of the weight plus T, then we can show that that the property is decided, because we can argue that none of the validators in the committee will be able to make a new disagreeing message that isn't an equivocation. And the argument is relatively simple because they have each seen Q of them, which is at least 1/2 plus T of all agreeing. And if even if T equivocate, so equivocating won't be enough to bring it to below 1/2 because of the 1/2 plus T. So they actually have to produce a new disagreeing message in order to flip the consensus. But they can't produce a new disagreeing before seeing other disagreeings that flip them more than 1/2. And that can't be done with just equivocations, just T. So we can show, because they each see Q, which is at least 1/2 plus T, that none of them are going to be able to make a new message that disagrees that isn't an equivocation. And that kind of shows that they can't make new honest disagreeing messages, and therefore that they can't flip the value of the consensus. So I just kind of described the condition for the single layer clique, or this new kind of committee, this slightly more porous committee rather than fully connected subgraph, and the algorithm for finding it, and kind of why it's sound. We could talk about the n layer version, or the multiple layers of the kind of multiple layer version of this protocol, but maybe you guys have questions.
Sounds pretty cool. Pretty excited to read the write-up when it's ready. I was wondering if you guys have thought about what efficiency gains you could have if you take into account that you're computing this sort of incrementally, right? Whenever you get a new message, you want to update the safety of existing messages.
Yeah, that's a future work. I mean, it's something that we're aware of, but haven't done work on yet.
Cool.
But yeah, good. Definitely something that we need to look at. So should I go on to describe the multi-layer version?
Sure, go ahead.
It's a little bit more complicated, but basically the idea is that we're going to have multiple layers of seeing each other agree. And so, this notion of just seeing, so layer one I described earlier, where there's out of the set of validators, every element of the set sees Q of them lobbied by Q of them. And they see them agree. So let's call that first agreement layer 0. And the message that's in layer 1 is the one that sees all of these Q lobbying agreements. In layer 2, we see Q of these layer 1 messages that saw Q lobbying agreements from layer 0. So the definition of being in layer K is that you have you have messages from Q of the validators in this committee from layer K minus 1 in your justification. So the first agreeing message, like the earliest agreeing message is like the first message in layer 0. First message in layer 1 is the first message that's lobbied by Q of the validators in the committee. The first message in layer 2 is the first message that's lobbied by Q messages from layer 1 from the validators in the committee. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you follow that. And so is the condition on Q still the same here, or can we let Q be a smaller value because we're having more layers?
Yeah, exactly. So we end up getting, instead of 1/2 plus T, we get 1/2 plus T over 2 times 1 minus 2 to the minus K. So what happens is basically when K is 1, we get 1/2 plus T. When K is infinity, we get 1/2 plus 1/2 T. And then in the meantime, you get this exponential drop off. We go from, half to 2/3 to 7/8. You just kind of get closer and closer, to 15/16 and so on. To the you get closer and closer to 1/2 plus 1/2 T. 4/7. I don't remember exactly what. It approaches 1/2 plus 1/2 T really quickly in growing K.
Okay, so 1/2 plus 1/2 T. So if we're looking for a fault tolerance of 2/3, then we would need 1/2 plus 1/3.
Yeah, but if you're looking for a fault tolerance of 1/3, then you need 1/2 plus 1/6. So, but here, well, let me have I did have it right. So it's n over 2 plus T over 2 times 1 minus 2 to the minus K. Is the committee size. So it basically is exactly the optimal size from given the quorum overlap argument. which is that if you use Q nodes, then like the overlap is in the worst case 2Q minus N nodes, and therefore you can't tolerate more than 2Q minus N faults, which is the N plus T over 2 number. So these kind of multiple layers of agreement, or seeing other people in the committee agree, interestingly, don't need to be the same people. It just needs to be Q of them in the committee at every layer. So this gives us quite a bit more flexibility around like how to build these cliques. The layers basically have the similar property to the layers of the clique, which is that you need to kind of equivocate at lower layers in order to cause messages that disagree at higher layers. And equivocations from lower layers become visible at higher layers, so that the equivocation budget gets spent. So that after you make enough layers, there's no way that you have enough equivocation budget with just 2 faults to create a new honest disagreeing message, which would have to be, if you have a K-layer clique or a K-layer committee, it would have to be created at least level K. So if you're going to make a new disagreeing message at any lower level, it has to be an equivocation. It's kind of one of the consequences of this construction, because all the messages from the layer 0 and above all agree. So if you make a new disagreeing message, it needs to be justified by sufficient number of, it needs to be justified by a majority weight on the disagree. And it's not going to be possible to justify it there without a certain number of equivocations in a lower layer. But the equivocation budget sorry, I'm getting distracted by an edge case. So you can have disagreeing messages that are older than layer 0. But if you wanted to include them as a new later message in your justification, and they're from members of the committee that you've already seen disagreeing, then that's either going to be an equivocation or an earlier message, and you can't include the earlier messages without equivocating yourself. So at the bottom layer, the only way to include new disagreeing messages from the validators that you've seen agreeing, the Q ones, which you have to see disagreeing in order to switch, is to equivocate. I think there's a more straightforward argument, but at the end of the day, the kind of construction forces new disagreeing messages to be equivocations unless they're created at the top layer. And then basically what happens is you have to spend a bunch of equivocation budget at the lower layers in order to create this new disagreeing message at the top layer, the new honest disagreeing message. And you have to spend them somewhat less efficiently than you do just in a single layer, because the multi-layer thing forces the equivocations to become visible at the top layer. And equivocations that are visible at the top layer, don't serve as new disagreeing messages. They just drop that validator out of the consideration for the majority. So I don't know, hopefully that makes some sense. But a write-up is coming, and that should help a lot. And the soundness argument is very similar to the one layer version. And we basically just try to show that it's impossible to create a new disagreeing messages for anyone in the committee. Assuming that there's not more than some number of faults. And basically it's like a accounting for which equivocations, how many equivocations have to at least become visible at the top layer. Or one layer above, and then we kind of use an inductive proof. Also still in the works, but there's basically a relatively very similar to the same one layer proof that has also an inductive kind of induction in it for does induction over the layers. And finally, the last thing to talk about is the algorithm for the multi-layer clique, and basically it's the same. It's basically the same algorithm, only you need to construct the k levels of the lobbying graph instead of just one. But after you have, maybe it's more complicated. Anyways, we haven't really fully fleshed out the algorithm. I guess I don't want to err on the side of caution and just not discuss it too much.
Are you imagining that you'll have to choose in advance a value of k, or will the algorithm sort of dynamically look for lower and lower layers of agreement? And
yeah, that's definitely something we're discussing. Right, we ideally we would dynamically. So basically, you would look at one layer, and then if you had the decision at one layer, you would stop. But if you didn't have enough support at one layer to have a decision, even with any number of layers, then you would also stop. But if it's possible that you could have a decision by doing more layers, then you would continue and do more layers. So ideally we'd be pretty clever about it. But for now, I think we're just assuming that you're calculating for a static k.
You guys still there? I can't hear you.
Yeah, no, I was just done.
Oh, okay, cool.
Hello.
Hey, Kent.
Again.
Cool. I'm glad I made it. Sorry I'm late.
Yeah, no worries.
Did everyone go?
No, just me.
Not
but
yet. We were just...
I was sharing a more efficient decision oracle that some amazing math people came up with over the last couple of days.
Cool.
But I guess other people should give updates too. I guess unless there's more questions for you, Michael. Hopefully you're satisfied with the answer to the last one.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like you said, it's still under active development. So doing it for the case of static k makes sense, and then thinking about how to interpolate between different cases. Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm really excited about this update. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those parts that still is more of a possible risk area. Is that it might be difficult to detect decisions. So the efficient oracle is nice.
So I don't have any particular updates on my end.
Cool. Kent, did you want to go?
Sure. Let me post a link in the chat. So basically the summary of it is that I think I have a more efficient estimator. And so like in specific, it's constant time in the number of blocks. So the gist of it is that you can store the depth that of the last time each validator proposed inside the block, right next to their stake. And so like basically every time you propose a block, you increment every validator's counter by 1, and then you reset yours to 0. And then by doing this, now you basically have all the information you need to execute the fork choice rule. That's, I guess, equivalent to latest message driven ghost.
So are you keeping track of the last time they agreed with this block, or the last time they just made a block? Or I'm not trying to follow.
Yeah, just last time they made a block.
But that's more of a justification thing than a block thing, right?
No. So, like, it's how should I say it? Like
the last time they made a block in that chain.
In that chain, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's the last. But that's not necessarily the last height at which they agree with that chain.
Sure, they could have switched over to a different chain, right?
Yeah, and they could maybe only agree at some lower height now.
Sure, but the point is that it doesn't matter whether they've switched to another chain. Like if they've switched to another chain more recently, that chain will be weighted higher.
Not necessarily.
Or, not sorry, I didn't mean weighted higher, but like it will be scored higher according to my algorithm.
In their justification, it'll be scored higher, but in our view, it might not be.
Well, so you only score the latest messages, and this is why it's constant time.
You only weight them, but it sounds like you're not going to have the latest messages.
Well, latest messages from your view.
And in each one of those, you look at when was the last block from each validator.
So, yeah, sorry the background noise. But basically, like the algorithm is you sort of do the latest message driven ghost in memory. So like, I mean, I guess I can quickly explain it, but you start off by subtracting the maximum depth counter. So like, let's do it with like 2 validators. Just keep it simple. One will always have a counter of 0, right? Because one would have just proposed a block, or like that's the block they're processing, and then the other would have, let's say, a depth of 1. Then you subtract 1 from both of those because that's the maximum value, and then so you would end up with one I call it normalized counter, that is of -1, and the other is 0. And once you have those counters, you drop the first value. Oh, sorry. You drop the highest value normalized counter, and the validator corresponding to that, and then you take the negated sum of all the rest, and that value, that negated sum, becomes the first element of the first tuple in an array. And then the maximum value normalized counter of the remaining validators will become the second element of the first tuple in that array. But I guess in my example, or like the one I'm just explaining now, is there's only two validators. So let's say they both have a weight of 10 each, then essentially you would, for the score array, call it, you would drop the first, or the one which has a normalized counter of 0, and then you would sum the rest, but there's only one left. So so the negated sum would be -10. And so that's like the first element of the tuple. And then the second element of the tuple is their value, which is -1, or the maximum value of the remaining validators, which there's only one left. So, and that their value is -1. So that's the score tuple. And so and then you essentially build an array. By the way, sorry, I know this sounds kind of convoluted, but it's basically just executing latest messages ghost in with the depth information, and it's in the link in the chat. I've written it down. That's probably a bit easier to follow.
Okay. So I'm just trying to figure out why you use the block structure instead of using justification structure, for example.
Oh, because if you use justifications, then you actually have to traverse down the blocks, right? So this is basically a condensed version of the justifications. Like the depth of the last time the validator proposed it's essentially like a condensed justification map.
Yeah, it's a memoization and summary. Is what it's
Exactly.
Yeah, but I don't understand why that's memoizing the right information, because like they could easily have a more recent block that agrees with like a higher block in the chain, or like a lower block in the chain. So it seems like the last block that they actually got in the chain doesn't seem to be relevant at all to the last message in the chain that they actually agree with their latest message.
No, because if let's say they propose on top of a sort of what I would call like a higher scoring chain, then that will be reflected in that chain. So like when you score that chain, it would be like, according to this algorithm, like it would be scored higher, just like with Ghost. So yeah, like this algorithm also like it ranks basically deeper chains. Like it's nothing, I don't know, like it's the same as latest message driven Ghost, right? It just like there's no information that you can gain from the justification structure that is like there's no additional information in that.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see that. I don't see it right now. But maybe I should like just read it and hold off, because we only have like, I don't know, 18 minutes left, and I'm not sure if there's any other things to talk about. But if not, maybe we just continue on this.
I guess one thing.
Give it a few more minutes, right?
Yeah, just one question is like, is there, I guess, a couple, like what would be a convincing example? Like what I guess what
I want to see, for example, just like a calculation where you identify the like, so like tell me like, okay, what is the score of a chain?
So once you build the array, you get it's a list of tuples, right? Where the first element of each tuple is the negated sum of some subset of validators, and then the second element of the tuple is essentially like the depth of like the last sort of the validator that hasn't been kicked out yet from the subset that has has proposed sort of furthest back in the past, if that makes sense, or like their block is like deepest. That's sort of what that number represents. So given that array, you can compare arrays against each other by just going down the array. You ignore the tuple and you just like do a straight up comparison where if there are any ties, so you look at the first element of each array, and if one is less than the other, then that is the one you choose. That's the one with the lower score, and you pick the one with the lowest score. And if they're tied, then you go down to the second element and you compare those values, and then so on. So you just like run down the array, and at some point, unless they're the same block, they have to differ. And so like one will be lower than the other, and that's the lowest scoring array. And so you pick that block as the tip of the estimator.
So I don't understand what these negative sums of validator weights represent.
So I guess it makes sense when you like let's say there's just two validators, right? And one has built a really long chain up, and then the other is still at genesis. So the first negated sum basically is dropping the validator that is still at genesis, and it's summing over the one that's not at genesis. So like it's doing ghost, right, in that sense. Or like maybe that wasn't a great example, but like it's summing over all the validators that haven't been dropped. And let's say like instead there was like 3 validators, and so one of them is sort of at genesis, it hasn't done anything. One of them has built one block, and then the third validator has built a block on the second one. And in this case, like you first drop the one, or like conceptually you drop the validator that's still stuck at genesis, and then you drop the first validator that only has proposed one block. I should have said earlier that when you compute the score for the third validator's second block, or not second block, but like first block that is 2 higher than the genesis, like that, yeah, like that's sort of how the negated sums are built up. So yeah, sorry, I feel like I didn't do such a great job, but did that give you maybe an idea?
It gave me some intuition, but so yeah, I think it helped a bit.
I see. Yeah,
I think it'd be neat to see a proof that this is equivalent to LMD Ghost.
Well, I can't give you a proof, but I can give you an algorithm that computes this, and you can give me any set of inputs, and I'll give you, or like the algorithm will give you an output that shows that they're equivalent. That's like, yeah.
Yeah, no,
I know that's not a
By
proof. But like,
equivalent, by equivalent, you mean that they always agree, right? Because they're not
Yes.
equivalent in the sense of the time computed.
exactly.
Yeah, the outputs are always the same. I think that would be a cool thing to see, a proof of having a lot of examples gives us confidence that it's right, but I think it'd be nice to see a
Yes. So the proof strategy is nice, right? So you can say for a given score, or for any given outcome, you can say exactly what LMD Ghost would do, and now you have enough information to calculate what your algorithm would do, right? And so then, yeah, that would be your basic proof strategy. It seems like it's straightforward to come up with a proof. I mean, if the proof exists, you have a proof strategy.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. But in the link I sent, there's like Vitalik gave two examples, or like I guess forced me to solve two examples. They're pretty simple ones. I know it might not be too convincing with those, but I think yeah, if it, like I'll write up some like more complicated ones. Yeah.
So apart from the
So,
equivalence
yeah.
question, I have a couple questions about this. One is, I think Vitalik was possibly hinting at this with his one question, but I guess like when you get a block that say claims some validator made some message at some depth, right? You still have to check that's true in your DAG, right? So there's still like the verification of blocks takes a little bit longer.
Yeah. No, that's easy because at every block you check that the parent's map contains the same values -1, but for yourself it's 0, right? Like, so sorry that wasn't explained well, but like basically whenever you propose a new block, all you do is you take the existing map that has the stakes and the counters, and then you bump everyone's counter by 1, and then for yourself you set it to 0 because you're proposing the latest block in that chain. All right, so like when you do the validation, you just traverse backwards 1 block, your parent, right? And you check that if you add up, or not add up, if you add 1 to all the counters, then you'll get the current map. I mean, minus the counter for yourself.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. Yep, I'm following that. So that's cool. And then the other thing I was wondering about, because it wasn't discussed yet on the thread here, is how it interacts with validator rotation. So when the map is being changed, like
I was thinking about that too. Like it's not. I mean, it's not intuitive or immediate how it could be done. Like I'm sure like you would have to at least know when the rotation happened, and then
Well, you could do validated rotations every like fixed number of blocks.
yeah. So that would be an easy sort of way. Like yeah, like I'm sure if you knew when, then it would be easy to incorporate that information.
We can literally tile them so that they're a completely separate execution of Ghost for X number of blocks.
Sure, but like the depth information, it needs to somehow cascade down. Yeah, sorry, I'll have to think about it a bit more. Like, yeah.
Very cool though. Thanks, Kent. I'm gonna try to check it out.
Thanks.
So does anyone else have anything?
Well, I've got something, but it's going to take more than 6 minutes to lay out. So I'm happy to lay it out next week.
Don't want to give a teaser?
Well, I've been teasing about it for the last few times. We have a pretty crisp notion of how to express conditions that will lead to liveness.
I had a thought on that. That some basically we can express constraints on an interpreter as constraints on the rewrites. But that sometimes that's not realistic in terms of how the software is executing, because you might require this interpreter with global knowledge, which is not fortunate.
Yeah.
And so I've been kind of struggling or thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the interpreter metaphor works here, so I'd have to.
It's somehow the thing that decides what reductions are applied.
Okay.
And so if the synchrony assumption has to do with, different reductions being applied in kind of fairly or in a certain way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think there's a nice condition language that we've got, but I'm happy to describe it next time. It'll take a little bit more time to schedule whatever it is, 4 minutes.
Sounds good.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, if you want to prepare, read that paper that I sent out a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, I've got to stand up in about 4 minutes, so I'm going to drop off.
Okay, see you.
I'll see you guys
All right,
next
thanks,
week.
everybody.
Did you, Vlad, any chance you can pop up to Seattle?
I'll think about it, but it wouldn't be until next week.
Okay.
Let's check.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right.